Hi guys, my name's Temi. I'm the Head of Business Development here at CybSafe, and welcome to PeepSec. Today I'm joined by Mitch, the COO of Volta. He's also a consultant for Olio, and let's jump into the conversation. So Mitch, thank you for joining me.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm really good. I've been really excited to speak to you. So
Likewise, really looking forward to it.
I want to jump straight in, right? So
Please.
you're a big, you said part-time musician.
Yes.
Talk me through that. What instruments do you play? Are we talking electronic music?
Oh wow, part-time musician indeed. Oh, that's probably glorifying me a little bit. I started off, I guess, on the recorder, like all people at primary school tend to
Classic,
do.
yeah.
And worked my sort of way through, and really kind of fell in love with piano, of all the instruments. Love just sort of, I guess, kind of freedom expression, and kind of really went through actually and resonated with jazz of all genres. I think I sort of gave it up around 16, probably because the parents were a little bit overbearing with practice, and I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of repeating scales and everything like that.
It's not that exciting, is it?
Yeah, it runs its course. And then, to be honest, back then I was massively into my hip hop. My first concert I went to was CG Unit, and then actually I went to Ibiza the first time when I was about 17 or 18 and saw a set by Sven Väth from Cocoon.
Yeah.
And that was that, and went straight into house. Absolutely loved it. I didn't know how I could find the music or the genre, and went on this sort of exploratory journey, which basically unfolded to me learning how to DJ, because I couldn't find what I heard because a lot of these sets were never released online.
Exactly, yeah.
So I guess now it's always been a part-time sort of DJ, purely for the love. Played a lot at uni, a lot less now, given work and life and other commitments. But yeah, I guess that's myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. Talk me through your journey with Volta and how that started.
It's, I guess, an unusual journey, especially into the tech world. So I kind of in and around that era where I was sort of exploring DJing and kind of finding myself in terms of my music, I was actually running an event company. Sort of just looking after kind of corporate events and running sort of promoting the classic sort of pre-uni kind of vibes. Went pretty well, but for some reason, I guess, throughout uni, I wanted to go into investment banking of all careers.
Music, investment banking, some say they are very much aligned.
Yes, I mean, you do look to is it David Solomon, CEO of Goldman, who's seemingly DJing on the side, so it's cliche, but there's something. But yeah,
Carve your own lane,
Carve your own lane, exactly. And yeah, went into investment banking. I actually really enjoyed it, to be fair, in terms of the kind of the learnings it gave me and the experience. I was lucky that I was surrounded by good people, and made some amazing friends. But sort of after that kind of 4 or 5 year stint, I kind of wanted to go back to being an entrepreneur and kind of picking up my roots in events. Started a business called Nez, which is my first sort of tech startup per se. And that was all around the idea of essentially trying to be the Google pay-per-click of the offline space. So we sort of worked with restaurants, bars, cafes, and rather than sort of sending customers to websites, our job was to send literal footfall into restaurants. So it kind of borrowed a lot of my learnings from the banking background of sort of data-driven design and trying to use sort of analytics to kind of to actually be beneficial. And we had a big sort of market share with independents, and our big sort of rhetoric was help the independent. If the Pret-a-Manger's have a huge market share and a big marketing budget, the small family-run business likely doesn't know how to deploy it. So that was our sort of our foray in. In and around that sort of journey, actually, around about 2 years into kind of me building up Nez, my current co-founder, Alex from Volta, actually became my flatmate. We'd never met each other before.
How a great business is
exactly,
formed, right?
how the kind of stars aligned sort of thing. So he moved into my flat, and the main reason being I was looking for myself and my one of my best friends were looking for a third flatmate, and we were living in Shoreditch at the time. And again, being the cliche ex-investment banker, my living room had more decks, speakers, music hardware, keyboards than there was living space.
Describing my home right now. So
exactly.
I guess I thought I also live in Shoreditch, so
we're there.
That cliche as well.
We're there. So naturally, it was a little bit of a hard sell to get a third flatmate involved, because you'd sort of see this living room and think, this is daunting.
Yeah.
Especially when our rhetoric was, we work super hard during the week, but of course the weekend, we're a bit more adventurous.
6 o'clock Friday.
And it's a different kind of style. So he moved in also as a musician himself, and he's played piano, drums. He actually drummed for a party for Lauryn Hill which could have taken him down a very different career path.
That's insane.
So yeah, we sort of immediately hit it off. He was working musicians as a marketer in the States, quit his job in the States to come to the UK and to study at Imperial in his 30s to study innovation. He really wanted to kind of get into technology.
That's really cool.
And so I kind of saw, and what he started working on rather Imperial was the early stages of Volta. And I saw him kind of working the inner stages of Volta, starting to work through some of the IP. And at the same time, he saw me scaling up my last business, Nez. So it was a very organic relationship where we sort of exploring ideas. And, you know, with Nez, at least, we got to about 300,000 monthly active users. Went through 5 rounds of funding, and you can guess where this story goes, which is a business facing restaurants once coronavirus hit and the pandemic hit, a business moving people in a global lockdown.
Yeah.
Doesn't really...
That's a hard one to try and solve.
That's a hard one to try and solve. It doesn't really have many available pivots. You know, delivery was the natural one, but that was something that, you know, the market share of Deliveroo and Uber Eats and such,
huge. Yeah.
It was a space you couldn't break into. And to be honest, from an ethic point of view, you know, that was something that we weren't willing to kind of even explore. You know, I was always around helping the underdog. So at that point, Alex had already kind of come out of Imperial, went through the early stages of prototyping Volta. And he sort of, when Nez was kind of looking a bit shaky, he essentially extended the hand to say, you know, would you like to come on as a co-founder of the project? And to me, it was obviously hard at first because, you know, I'd worked on 5 years on Nez. We got so much traction, and it was hard to sort of see that baby kind of, hard to let it go, of course. So I sort of was advising him kind of for 6 months as a kind of formal advisor. And then the writing was on the wall after the second lockdown. The Eat Out to Help Out scheme, we thought we were having a blinder. In reality, once a second lockdown hit and we'd restarted the business, spent money in marketing, rehired people, that was the final sort of nail in the coffin. So it was actually almost my other half who sort of basically said to me, if you don't take this role at Volta, combining your passion of music and seemingly what you're pretty okay at in terms of technology, you're going to regret this, and you should absolutely take it. It seems daunting going to another startup right at the beginning, because that was a big thing for me, which was starting from scratch again. Maybe I'd go and work at a better funded, you know, Series A startup.
The law of sunk cost, right? Like you
exactly.
Like you put the time in, so
exactly.
to step away is quite scary.
You know, and early stage startups don't exactly afford great pay and all that kind of stuff. But I was, you know, by that point, at least when I first started my business, I was 25. When I came into Volta, I was more like 28, 29. You know, life commitments means that low income makes it a bit trickier.
Got
but
people to take care of at that point.
That was it, and sort of went, you know, 2 feet, sort of head first. And that is the story of how I got into Volta.
That's amazing.
That's and the next is where we are now today.
That's a pretty cool story.
Thank you.
It sounds like a couple of different things having to come together, and then like it's almost fate. Dare I say. I
do have this weird perspective that, you know, without getting too sort of philosophical, that everything's meant to be. What will be, and it was meant to happen, sort of in respect. And you know, as learnings I took from Nez, and even from my investment banking career, I thought, you know, what could I transfer in terms of skills from investment banking into technology? You know, I worked as a derivatives banker. Like, what transferable skills are there? And actually, you realise with every journey you take, a new chapter you take, there are so many transferable skills in ways that you never thought. Whether it was how to communicate with people, how to be in a meeting with a C-suite executive when you are a 23-year-old kid trying to prove yourself. You know, and even from Nez, it was having that deep-rooted sort of systems architecture and scaling mentality that, you know, arguably at Volta, our stack were built on, you know, on a game engine called Unity. It's very metaversal and mixed reality. The technology is obviously beyond me, you know, and I luckily have some fantastically talented people to look after that part of the business. And it's about recognizing, okay, I'm good at these parts in terms of data and strategy and business. I can still complement the business without necessarily, you know, being a developer or a coder per se.
I think it's kind of understanding yourself to an extent. Because, you know, the more you can do that, the more you can then look at a business and say, these are the areas in which I think I can really help.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I'll leave you to do the dev stuff because that's way beyond my skill set.
Literally.
But, you know, structure and organization and kind of keeping the business alive, I've got that.
Absolutely. And to that point, the learnings being, my role as co-founder and COO, I always thought, when I was younger, I'd be the CEO. And I've kind of realized, kind of going through my chapters, I'm not that character. I am not. I actually really enjoy process. I love numbers. I love data. The concept of riding the entire risk of the organization is something that feels very daunting to me. And I kind of tip my hat to my fellow co-founder Alex and my prior one at Nez in terms of that kind of level of responsibility. Because you're ultimately responsible for everything in the organization.
The buck stops at you, right? So
literally, exactly.
You can be like, oh God, this has happened, and just turn to Alex and say, well.
I wish that was the case. I wish that was the case. No, it's not quite as black and white as that.
Simple.
Yeah, exactly. But at least, carry the weight of the organization from the very, very early stages, which typically the CEOs have. This kind of level of tenacity that I just kind of admire in terms of kind of in the face of all, and sometimes logic. I mean, if I'm honest, I said to Alex when he was starting the early stages of Volta, I said, dude, this is crazy. You want to build a mixed reality piece of software that's going to allow artists to make virtual venues? How are you going to scale this organization? How are you going to scale this? How are you going to get funding to build something like that? I can see the solution, but
it's almost so far-fetched.
It's so far-fetched.
Yeah.
And I've seen this in multiple CEOs who have this vision that go, yeah, I know, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's the mentality you need. Right?
Absolutely.
It's amazing. That is so cool.
Thanks.
I'm curious, actually. You've touched on it a bit about what Volta actually does.
Yes.
Talk me through it for the fans at PeepSec who are itching to know exactly what Volta
does. Fans of PeepSec. So what is Volta? I mean, in my sort of words, I'd kind of loosely put it as an experience creation platform that allows artists, no matter how big or small, to create their own experiences in a couple of clicks. So very much, I like to almost share it through a story, which is, and this is really how Volta sort of changed, and COVID was an accelerant. Pre-COVID, it actually was very VR heavy, where the idea was that rather than say using, linear instruments like a keyboard or decks if you're DJing to control music, why can't you use the 3D space? So you could essentially pick up the vocals and throw them into where you need them, or stretch the bass lines and actually use VR as this gestural interface. When when that was happening around, Alex essentially was having to build a virtual environment, a world where you could do all these kind of gestures. And when COVID happened, it was abundantly clear, especially in music was the second hardest hit sector globally, second to retail.
Yeah.
Because musicians, as you'll know, make 80% of their income from live events.
Yep.
Live events.
No gigging. That was.
No gigging is tough.
Yeah, that
and
sucks.
80% on average of income comes from live events. So musicians were really harmed and really hurt from it. And what we saw was that, the world's biggest names defined by reach, really the pop stars here, went off to do these virtual events and mixed reality events in Fortnite and away.
The Travis Scott thing in
exactly.
Fortnite. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Travis Scott, and dare we say, considering what happened recently in the States, but
maybe you should have stuck to virtual. But
that's he is a poster child for what that experience represents, because the figures he obtained of 54 million cumulative users, it really shook up the touring industry. And the touring industry went, hang on here, it would take me 200 sold out stadiums to get that level of reach. I can do one virtual event and get that many impressions.
Exactly.
We're missing a trick here. And especially in an industry that's always been very difficult to monetize. We all know the challenges through Spotify and such. So, these massive musicians went off to do these mixed reality events. But the problem with them is, to create these events, you need essentially a Hollywood-grade production studio. You need budgets in the excess of multi-millions. You need 6 to 12 months of lead time and a specialist crew with specialized hardware, and the list goes on. So the sheer complexity, accessibility, and cost of actually doing it essentially rendered anyone who isn't the Rihannas, Beyoncés, the Travis Scotts of the world unable to compete.
You just watch from a distance.
Exactly. And essentially, what we saw was pretty much 99% of the market went off to stream on YouTube and Twitch, because that was, a free technology.
The barrier to entry is so low with things like Twitch.
Exactly. And as we sort of joke internally, whilst you have these megastars doing these crazy virtual performances and mixed reality settings, everyone else was DJing from their bedroom with 2 decks and a disco ball. which is completely uninspiring and the other end of the spectrum. And this, the schism between the world's biggest names and everyone else just got bigger.
I feel like I've just been called out.
I mean, it's the industry trend, right?
It's what you had to do at the time. Yeah.
Exactly. It was hustling en masse, and it really kind of brought to attention as a huge gap in the market for where Volta came in to solve for, which is a tool that allows these creators who are on YouTube or Twitch or trying to make ancillary revenue to essentially download the software for free from our website. It's a self-serve tool that allows anyone, no matter how big or small, to literally create their own immersive world, just like what Travis Scott did in Fortnite and Lil Nas X and Roblox. With a drag and drop editor, everything's audio reactive. It plugs straight into whatever equipment you're already using. So if you're using Dex or Ableton or Tractor or Recordbox, we've got native integrations with a lot. So if you're a musician, you still focus on your music. You just pipe it through Volta, and out comes this experience,
That's amazing.
which helps the fans engage with you. And really where we're taking this next is, again, it's really core to the mission, which is, we're trying to bridge that divide between the world's biggest names and everyone else, helping the underdogs, trying to help them kind of succeed with those who are bigger than them. And what we're really interested in exploring, and why I deliberately use the word of we're free, is because we always will be for artists. That is a mission statement. Artists in general don't make enough income from their art. The median salary is $15,000 a year for musicians globally.
Yeah, it's not great.
it's a tough sector. So really, what we're exploring now is bringing gaming mechanics from Fortnite, where you have in-app purchases and can upgrade your packs, and actually bringing that experience to what we're doing in music, such that fans can actually co-create when they're watching these musical experiences and think and say, okay, I've seen the desert spaceship world enough now. I'll happily pay £10 in order to change the whole virtual environment. Yeah. And that will happen globally for every spectator watching the experience. So it's a way to gamify.
Like a vested interest in...
Exactly. And it really works for the super fans. And we saw this on Twitch, for example, where what we learned was, on platforms like Twitch, you don't need a massive audience to make a reasonable income. So
you just need a dedicated...
Exactly that. And Tracy Chan, who's the head of music there, came out with a statement saying that essentially, in order to make a median income of $50,000 a year on Twitch, you only need 183 concurrent users on Twitch. That's it. Because you just need a dedicated fan base, a loyal fan base, rather than a large fan base.
Come back,
Exactly, and they would pay for subscriptions and add-ons and emoji overlays
and gifting and things like that.
Bingo. And so our extension of that's taken that to the next level, and rather than just having an emoji overlay or donations, it's actually you get to co-create with your artist. You get to experience.
Just taking it that step further.
Their mind, exactly. Yeah. And a mental model for us is always looking at the Daft Punks, the Deadmau5s, the Bjorks, the Nine Inch Nails, the Gorillaz, all these artists that created, musical experience that was almost bigger than the music. And that trend has happened ever since Pink Floyd, right? We used to stand in a concert, and there was, one artist or a band on stage, and that was it. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, strobe lighting came out, pyrotechnics came out, and now it's the spectacle.
Because it's the whole experience, isn't it? It's the audio-visual experience.
So. Exactly. So that's really the mental model we're exploring. Like, how do we take that to the next level?
So cool.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. One thing you've touched on now with both businesses is like the want to help the underdog.
Yes.
I think that's really impressive. Where does that drive come from?
Very good question. I mean, I think to a certain degree it has an element of my dad. He's always been someone that's kind of embraced sort of helping those who really need it, and he has this irrational fear, I think, of one day waking up and being homeless. So he himself has always tried to help the homeless, and that's always stuck in me from a young age, and really sort of gravitated me towards how do you help people less fortunate or less who just found themselves in the wrong positions. I think working investment banking really coloured that perspective in terms of making it clearer for me that I wanted to do good, and to a certain degree where I worked was in a division which was we only profit if our clients profit, but it's still on the kind of profit side of the business, right? So transitioning to NES, it was how do I deploy that skill set in a way that's beneficial? And look, let's not kid ourselves. Often that part of the market, those who are underrepresented, is a bigger part of the market. It is a bigger piece. So there is, by nature of, you get to do something that's good and feel really empowered and actually try and make a difference. But at the same time, it can be profitable.
Yeah, but I think it's that balance, right?
It's the balance.
You can. It's okay to make a profit, I think. But if you're still giving back at the same time and helping those who are less fortunate, then that's a really positive bonus, right?
I'd like to agree. I tend to agree. I mean, look, it transcends into one of the companies I consult for is Olio. They label themselves as a profit for good company.
Mm-hmm.
They don't label themselves as a charity quite deliberately. It is profit for good. How do we use kind of capitalism and enterprise in order to touch as many people's lives? Because typically, charities are fantastic, but they struggle in scale because they rely on donations. So how do you actually use profit to actually turbocharge that flywheel and touch more people's lives in a different way?
It's basically how do you use the current system we live in to generate profit and help those who are less fortunate and who need that help more so than say you or I do is perfect.
Absolutely. I guess it transcends a lot of the kind of different things I work on, and similarly, I advise another company called Matter, which is all around dating apps for people with neurodiversity and making people feel inclusive, and no matter if you have ADHD or autism or OCD, there's a home for you, and you're not excluded from these other markets, which is all around, other markets, other apps. I'm not going to name any, but where you're encouraged to almost portray a fake persona of yourself, this glamorized,
all the best pictures,
best pictures, an unauthentic version of yourself, and even in that respect, dating apps globally, there's an increase of 40% of romance fraud, for example, where it's complete catfishing. And
we've seen I'm sure you've seen the recent.
The Tinder swindler. Yes, that's exactly. That's been illuminating.
Quite a big case of it, right? So but it's something that's definitely happening a lot more because people see these false ideals and think, oh wow, this is perfect.
Absolutely, and turbocharged by social media. Again, we can't name any few, but we all know the ones in question. And it's about breaking that mold, right? I think in general, the more you can make people feel empowered of what they're doing in their lives and they're taking control, going full circle back to your question, I think that's what really kind of makes me gravitate towards it, because that feeling is something that everyone deserves to have.
Yeah, absolutely. That feeling of having a safe space, right? A space where you can well and truly be your authentic self at all times.
Absolutely.
Which is amazing. You touched on Olio a little bit there. I love it, by the way. It's a great way to prevent food waste.
Thank you as a nod, but it's my founders.
Yeah, it's super cool. So again, for the fans at PeepSec, talk us through Olio.
So Olio is, I guess the easiest way to put it is a kind of a community-based sharing app with the ambition of stopping food waste at source. It's such a global problem in the magnitude that we essentially waste $1.2 trillion a year worth of food. The point being is that if food was a country, it would be the third largest producer of CO2 in the world, second to the US and China. Third to the US and China. So it really is a catastrophic problem. And when you look at food redistribution, even the UK alone, households are wasting something like £700 per household. And at the same time, you have something like 8.9 million people in the UK that are in poverty, in food poverty. Mm-hmm. So it really is a case of trying to figure out, how to redistribute all this food, and that's the point of Olio. It is an app that is first and foremost designed to encourage community members to share food. That's not exactly past the sell-by date, because that's not the case. Yeah. But if you have excess, and it's a problem, even if we all know we go to the supermarket, we buy the food we need for the week. Inevitably, some of the portions are too big or too small, so you have to buy 2 boxes or one, and there's leftover. So the idea is plan out your food, and anything you have left over, or not necessarily left over, but it's a case of this is good quality food, I'm not going to use it this week. Users are encouraged to share it on the application. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially one arm of the business, which is all around the community side, and again, it's a focus on inclusivity. The other side, which kind of still pulls it together with Olio, is what Olio calls the Food Waste Hero Team. And ultimately, it's a team of volunteers that Olio has recruited through the app channels and through the app channels, which essentially the volunteers work with major chains such as supermarket chains like Tesco's, all the way through to major restaurant chains. And the idea is that they will collect surplus food at the end of the day, put it on the application, and redistribute this food out. So the whole point is that looking at different sources of food where there's excess food waste, pooling it together and redistributing it to the community. Twofold. Severalfold. Of course, to limit the impact of food waste. And Olio itself, for example, has now saved, I believe, over 35 million portions of food, which is the equivalent of 4 billion litres of water. Food production is incredibly agriculturally intensive, and something like 800 million car miles, all simply through the idea of just redistributing that food. So the first aim, reducing food waste. Second aim, inclusivity and community. A lot of this is face to face, and considering we now have a problem with extreme loneliness that's surfacing in the UK and a lot of Western demographics, actually people feel very touched by this process, that they can either be a part of giving back to the community and going to their local shop, or having having goods at home that they no longer need or want to give to the community. I feel very empowered by doing so. On the other side, imagine if you're actually in food poverty and you can just walk down the road to your friends or a neighbour or someone,
and they'll provide you with some food.
Pick up a box and off you go. And even the recent example, and it's anecdotal, but students obviously struggle. And Olio have recently done a big push through Reddit. There's a lot of subreddit forums. Reddit people are very, very hyper engaged, but there's a student forum on food, and a user of Olio sort of put out that they were struggling. And within a day posted a picture that they essentially had enough stock for a month worth of food of, not exactly from a mix of tinned beans all the way through to actually veg and pasta and all sorts of kind of goods. So it's very touching to kind of see just how, something as what could seem as daunting as a kind of as a community peer-to-peer food sharing platform actually has legs. And that's been a humongous learning for me, and kind of how I got involved was a lot of parallels with my prior experience in NES, given working in restaurants and cafes, and a lot of the work we did was also food waste at the end of the day. But I always came from the camp, at least from banking and a bit of business school, that there's 3 things you can solve for in business, right? Which is price, quality, and quantity, and you can only optimize for 2 of those things. You can never optimize for all 3. I mean, Jeff Bezos has he kind of lives this mantra. And really what I learned very, very quickly, working at Olio, was there is a 4th thing. It's mission, and it goes around all of it. And that power of mission and what people feel empowered by, and going back to the point of empowerment, is fundamentally stronger than any 3 of those drivers. And we see it consistently. People spend, an hour of their days going to a local supermarket, collecting food, bringing it home, putting it into silos and distributing it out to the various individuals that requested that food.
I think because within human nature, we're social creatures, so that ability to help out and give back to an extent is deeply ingrained in all of us.
Absolutely.
I believe so. Having that opportunity for an app like Olio to be able to give back must be so incredible.
It really is.
One of the things I've really enjoyed about it as well, to be honest.
Thanks.
So it's incredible. I've said it about 3 times. Now. It's a really great thing.
It really is something special. And it couldn't come at a better time. We're seeing, by 2050, for example, we're going to add another 2.2 billion people to the planet. That's going to be an increase of another 40 to 60% of global food production. And we can't currently solve it. And the crazy thing is if we just redistributed 25% of the food we currently waste in the Western world, we'd feed the whole planet. So there's a path to success. But it just means more, Olio having to scale up and more entrants coming into the market to really work together to solve this problem.
Requires work. But it feels like you're very much on the journey to getting there, and I think it will.
I think the tide's changing, right? I mean, I think the pandemic really probably escalated people's concerns around where the planet's headed. We saw a lot of obviously outbreaks, on the back of COP and. The global warming crisis, and I think people's attitudes and behaviours are quite quickly now shifting. It's starting to become a bit of a snowball. The seed sort of gets sown at the beginning stages, and it's a weird parallel to make, but it's almost like the sort of startup mantra book of crossing the chasm, which is you have your your innovators right at the beginning, then you have sort of
that little bell
correct, exactly, the bell-shaped curve, and it's kind of that seed was sown many years ago, and you had your real sort of necessarily die-hard kind of enthusiasts, and and they were almost mocked years ago. And now it's becoming so mainstream to the point where if you don't engage, I think you have a duty to actually try and do something and
actively do your part, right? Because
exactly.
it will add up if everyone's doing their bit. Over time, we get to where we need to be.
And that's it. And look, there's another perspective on that point. There are those who are struggling less well off. So, I do agree with the rhetoric that it's very challenging for those to try and give back, but they don't need to. And that's kind of what Olio has really shown me, which is if there are those who are in a position where they can at least either help through an hour a week of their time, or food or even goods, because Olio isn't necessarily excluded to just food. There's a category called Made, where it's kind of local people in the community selling crafts that they've made, or paintings, or even a second called Borrow. So if you want to lend out, dining room furniture or gym equipment or anything you might have, it's still to that point. It's about redistribution and the kind of cyclical economy.
Yeah. And what you're doing as well is you're rebuilding this community aspect. You touched on the loneliness that it's really prevalent in the entire Western world right now. So having that ability to rebuild a community, you're then kind of less likely to hoard things for yourself, which is kind of, I think, a big problem in society right now. And you're more likely to take care of the community you're in, which is only going to help. And care about the people around you as well. So
absolutely,
it's a really, really positive thing.
Yeah, and long may it continue. I mean, look, the growth targets are ambitious. We're looking for 1 billion Olios by 2030. It's an ambitious target. You have to have ambitious targets out there. Yeah. Luckily, there's support from some major institutions, some major chains, and some fantastic partners in the mix. And everything we're now gearing up for on the Olio side is to cross the chasm to the mainstream. So there isn't just the enthusiasts and those who are making an active conscious effort. It is more ingrained as a part of lifestyle, and it moves that kind of mass market style of thinking. And it is that kind of very point around, you made, and obviously this year, the theme around empathy within PeepSec. Whether it's Olio sort of touching those in the community and giving back and making people feel very inclusive, I like to feel that Volta has the element of, even at concerts and gigs, right? And there's one thing I didn't touch on at Volta, which is, I mentioned a lot around YouTube and Twitch and the live streaming platforms. Everyone at Volta is an ex-musician, pretty much. We all love live, and our biggest fear is what we're going to create, distract from that live experience and actually kind of move it to a digital setting. And that's the very reason why, we look at, say, live streaming as the aspect of, if you can't be there at the physical location, here's an experience that might not be exactly as good as the live experience, but we want to make it quite close to that.
It's additional, right? You're providing another bit of entrance to a show. And there are some people who maybe don't want to be in big crowds. With social anxiety, with potentially with disabilities, potentially even if there's strobes and pyrotechnics, and there's various issues. So having that ability to kind of be in their own space but still feel immersed in the experience of everyone else is amazing. Affordability
as well, and for our perspective, global scale. So tying it all together, and one thing that we really focus on is actually the hybridization of events. So a lot of the events we've done is actually around, actually powering the visuals live at the venue and trying to make the actual experience live even more immersive by actually getting the fans to be a part of the experience, and then broadcasting that experience out to the 2D streaming platforms. We've explored VR. We have our thoughts on VR. We're not exactly super convinced on VR ourselves. Yeah. There's
some people are, not to name any names.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me personally, I think actually the company sort of has this thinking itself is VR does have its use case, right? And where we're seeing its use case, in our opinion, is in things like edtech and in one-to-one relationships. So if there's an experience where, for example, you need to learn to be a surgeon, we're finding great uses in sort of surgical training or nano teaching and these kind of very far out technologies, or even flight simulators and car simulators. And when it's a one-to-one experience, it works, because if you think of the concept of a VR headset, you put it on, you are blocking out the outside world by definition. So it struggles to be a social platform, a social tool, a social piece of hardware. And that's the very reason we struggle with it in the context of Volta and the B2C audience with consumers, because the experience of going to a live event it's all about going with your mates. It's
Exactly.
having a good time. You go out for a drink beforehand, you experience the night together, you can play back moments in your mind time and time again, and you can do that on your own, and absolutely, and there's a lot of people that do. But even then, if you're on your own, chances are you're going to bump into someone. You're going to have a chat over the bar. No one. It's very, very hard to stay entirely insular for an entire evening.
Mm-hmm.
And that very sensory experience, and whether it's the smell of some of the bathrooms or, the taste of a drink or kind of the visions that you're seeing, it is this sensory experience. So, putting on a VR headset, you're blocking out everything. You really are, and you're making it just you and the thing you're seeing.
It's almost quite isolating, isn't it?
And we exactly that. So we actually started off as a VR application. Our first use case, we didn't even look at 2D or live at venues. We were literally VR only. And every bit of research we did, all the research to consumers we did, every bit of user feedback was, this actually makes us feel more isolatory. And we were trying to double down on making it feel social and, connecting you with different friends in your bedrooms because everyone was stuck at home. And I think unless you can have an actual representation of your mate, your family member, or your partner, whoever you want to be, and you can almost feel and touch and smell, it will never be the same. And it just makes you feel more insular and more closed off from the outside world.
Because your brain's aware of the fact that, it's like uncanny valley, right? It's like something's off. So
exactly.
The whole thing's off.
Exactly. Yeah. And look, we managed to create some incredibly, visual experiences because the VR does allow for that. It does allow for things that you couldn't create in the real world. But you tie that together with music, an inherently social experience.
It's two things that kind of clash against each other.
It just clashed. And that's kind of where we started. I guess timing was obviously on our side because the pandemic started to kind of decline in terms of restrictions, live started returning, and that for us was taking all the learnings we had of VR, deploying it in the live scenario and broadcasting out to 2D, and now we kind of found that sweet spot of how do we make that experience as social as possible, as sensory as possible, and looking into all things kinetic in terms of touch and feel and smell, and how do we kind of replicate all these different ideas. And for us, that's why I don't see, or at least we don't see, a future of us, walking around with VR headsets or spending our time too much in VR. Yes, there could be applications, let's say in gaming and whatever, but we always think these social experiences will remain. AR, however, we're more bullish on AR. We do think there's an element there because it's an overlay to reality.
It's already around you, and then you're just kind of adding an extra layer on top.
Exactly. You still have your touch, you still have your smell, you still have your taste, you still have your vision, but there's the extension, the augmentation. By definition. By definition. So we're much more bullish on augmenting the experience and kind of adding, additive as opposed to deprecative.
No, I like that. It's a very kind of star story. I think some of the most successful startups often pivot, and my old CEO described this really well. It's a growth curve, right? Everyone assumes it's a real straight line going up, but actually, if you zoom in, there's a little tiny pivot.
I like to kind of always refer it to the growth cycle in terms of a business cycle, or a GDP of economies. It's you get a boom and a bust, and hopefully your bust doesn't get you quite back down to where you started from, but it is two steps forward, one step back.
Yeah, it's like we made a little bit of
progress.
progress.
Tough, and it's 3 forward and 3 back, but by and large, it's
still making progress. I mean, 3 forward and 3 back. You haven't gone backwards. Not fully.
You haven't gone backwards. You're just starting where you started. But so long as you're taking learnings on that journey, it's fine. If you end up 3 months later back where you started 3 months ago, if you learn something from that experience, you've got in your locker now. Don't do that thing.
Because don't do that again.
It's expensive. Time is expensive, and that. But for us, and I think every startup, it's not for us, and I think everyone listening, to this conversation will see the same, which is, time is the biggest commodity, and learning itself, failure rather is just right. There's no such thing as failure, right? In terms of learning, so long as you're learning something, it's not failure; it's actually progress, because you add one thing to your locker of, okay, I tried this thing, I learned from it, and I know not to do it.
Exactly.
So that's
how to reframe it going
that's
forward.
another thing not to do.
Failing forward, right?
Failing forward, exactly. Learn quick, fail fast is the phrase I was looking for. There we go, back to the startup mantra, back into the startup Bibles.
Honestly, it's been a real pleasure. This has been a phenomenal conversation. You
really enjoyed it.
An exceptional human being, and keep up.
Thank you so much.
Keep up what you're doing. It's I think the thing that stuck with me is how much you want to give back, and I think if you can hold on to that, you'll go incredibly far. Not to say you haven't gone incredibly far already, but that's where I see it.
Thank you. I feel very privileged and honored to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time as well. Really enjoyed meeting you.
You too. Thanks for joining us. For any more information on Mitch or PeepSec in general, you can find it at peepsec.com, and we'll see you with the next one.